Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of English Story Podcast, the podcast where we help you improve your English skills step by step. I'm Emily, and with me today is John.
Hi there. We're excited to talk about a topic that's really important for anyone learning English, whether you're just starting out or you've been studying for a while.
That's right, John. Today we're going to dive into the difference between knowledge and fluency. You might have heard these words before, but what do they really mean? And why is it important to understand the difference?
Exactly, Emily. You see, a lot of people think that just because they know the rules of English, like grammar, vocabulary, and sentence structure, they should be able to speak fluently, but that's not always the case, is it?
No, it's not. And that's where many learners get frustrated. They know the rules, but when it comes time to speak, they struggle. So, in today's episode, we're going to explore why that happens and share some tips on how to bridge the gap between knowledge and fluency.
And we'll make sure to keep it simple and clear, so even if you're just beginning to learn English, you can follow along and learn something useful.
Perfect. Let's start by breaking down what we mean by knowledge and fluency.
So when we talk about knowledge in language learning, we're usually talking about the rules of the language. This includes things like grammar, how sentences are structured, vocabulary, knowing the meaning of words, and pronunciation, how words are spoken.
Exactly, John. And it's really important to have this knowledge. For example, you need to know that in English we usually say, I go to the store, not I go store. The word to is small, but it's an important part of the sentence.
Right, but here's where things get tricky. Just because you know the rules doesn't mean you can use them fluently in a conversation. Fluency is about being able to speak smoothly and naturally without having to stop and think about every word or rule.
Think about it like driving a car. When you first learn to drive, you have to think about everything, how to use the steering wheel, the pedals, checking the mirrors. But after a while, it becomes natural, and you don't have to think about each action. Speaking a language is similar. At first, you need to think about the rules, but eventually, you want to be able to speak without overthinking.
That's a great comparison, Emily. And just like driving, it takes practice to become fluent. You can't just read a book about driving and expect to be good at it. You have to get behind the wheel and practice. The same goes for speaking English.
Exactly. So if you're learning English and you know the rules but still feel nervous or uncomfortable when you try to speak, don't worry. It's completely normal. It just means you're still working on building your fluency.
Now let's talk a little more about why knowledge alone isn't enough to make you fluent.
One reason is that language is more than just rules. It's about communication. When you're speaking, you're not just following rules. You're trying to express ideas, feelings, and thoughts. And to do that, you need to be able to speak naturally and with confidence.
That's true. Think about a conversation you might have with a friend. It's not just about getting the words right. It's also about the flow of the conversation, understanding when to pause, how to respond to what the other person says, and so on. These are things that come with practice, not just studying.
Another thing to consider is that English, like any language, has a lot of exceptions to the rules. For example, you might learn that the past tense of a verb usually ends in ed. But then you come across words like go and realize the past tense is went. Knowing the rule is important, but knowing how to use the exceptions is what makes you fluent.
And don't forget about idioms and expressions. English is full of them. These are phrases where the meaning isn't clear just from the individual words. For example, if someone says, it's raining cats and dogs, they don't mean that animals are falling from the sky. They mean it's raining heavily. Understanding and using these kinds of phrases is part of becoming fluent.
Exactly, John. And that's why even people who have studied English for years can still feel uncomfortable speaking. It's one thing to know the rules, but it's another to use them fluently in everyday conversation.
So how do you bridge the gap between knowledge and fluency? How do you move from knowing the rules to speaking confidently and naturally?
Great question, John. One of the best ways to start is by practicing speaking as much as possible. This might seem obvious, but it's something that many learners don't do enough of. They focus on studying, but not on actually using the language.
That's right. And practice doesn't just mean repeating sentences from a textbook. It means having real conversations with people. This could be with a language partner, a tutor, or even just speaking to yourself in the mirror. The key is to get used to forming sentences and expressing your thoughts in English.
Another tip is to listen to a lot of English. This can help you get a feel for how the language is used in real conversations. Listen to podcasts, watch TV shows or movies, or even listen to music. Pay attention to how people speak, the phrases they use, and the flow of the conversation.
That's a great point, Emily. Listening can also help you pick up on pronunciation and intonation, which are important parts of fluency. Try to mimic what you hear and don't be afraid to make mistakes. The more you practice, the better you'll get.
And speaking of mistakes, here's another tip. Don't be afraid to make them. Making mistakes is a natural part of learning. It's how you improve. If you're always worried about getting everything perfect, you'll hold yourself back. Instead, focus on communicating your ideas, even if it's not perfect.
That's so important, Emily. I always tell my students that fluency comes from confidence, not perfection. The more you speak, the more confident you'll become, and the more fluent you'll sound.
Exactly. And if you do make a mistake, don't worry about it too much. Just keep going. Most people will understand what you're trying to say, and that's what really matters. Another practical tip is to start thinking in English. This might sound difficult, but it's actually a great way to improve your fluency. Instead of translating everything from your native language, try to form your thoughts directly in English.
Yes, thinking in English can help you become more comfortable with the language and make speaking feel more natural. Start with simple things, like naming objects around you in English or thinking about what you need to do that day in English. And finally, try to immerse yourself in English as much as possible. Surround yourself with the language, change the language on your phone or social media to English, read books or articles in English, and try to use English in your daily life as much as you can.
That's great advice, John. The more you're exposed to English, the more it will become a natural part of your thinking and speaking.
Now that we've shared some tips, let's talk about a few practical exercises you can do to improve your fluency.
One exercise is the shadowing technique. This involves listening to a short clip of spoken English, like a podcast or a TV show, and then trying to repeat what you hear, almost at the same time. It helps you practice the rhythm and intonation of English, and it can really improve your speaking skills.
That's a good one. Another exercise is to practice conversation prompts. For example, you could pick a topic, like your favorite food or a recent trip you took, and try to speak about it for a few minutes. You can do this alone or with a partner. The goal is to get used to speaking for longer periods without stopping.
You can also try role-playing different scenarios, like ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or having a job interview. This helps you practice using English in different contexts, and it can make you feel more prepared for real-life situations.
And don't forget about the importance of reviewing your practice. After you do an exercise, take some time to think about what went well and what you found difficult. This can help you identify areas where you need more practice.
Yes, reflection is key. And remember, improving fluency takes time, so be patient with yourself. Keep practicing and don't be discouraged if it doesn't happen overnight.
Exactly. Every bit of practice brings you closer to your goal. And before you know it, you'll start to notice that speaking English feels more natural and less stressful.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. We hope you found our discussion on knowledge versus fluency helpful, and that you're leaving with some practical tips to improve your English speaking skills.
Remember, fluency is about confidence and practice, not just knowing the rules. So keep practicing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, and most importantly, enjoy the process of learning.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back with more tips and strategies to help you on your English learning journey.
Until then, keep practicing and stay confident. You're doing great.